sobering look at a dark current in our society. Tom Metzger thinks of himself as a true American. To him, that means advocating white supremacy and urging his followers, who are young whites known as skinheads, to put down blacks and Jews and Asians. When a young black man was murdered by his followers, Metzger chortled and cheered and called it a victory.
But he had no hand in the murder, wasn't there, didn't order it. Can you prosecute someone for pulling the strings of hate? In the land of free speech, how do you silence a bigot? Tonight, Tom Jarrell takes us into the world of Tom Metzger and his skinheads, and has the story of one man's efforts to make Metzger pay for a horrible crime, a chilling attack on a cool, damp night.
I'd like to ask you a few questions about the evening of November 12th, November 13th, 1988.
Testimony about a brutal murder in Portland, which would set off a chain reaction reaching far beyond the streets where it occurred. A group of teenagers, members of a racist skinhead gang, were leaving a friend's house on a rainy night when one of them saw a black man.
He indicated that he had seen, as he put it, a nigger up the street.
His name, Mulligata Sarah, an immigrant from Ethiopia. Sarah was on the street bidding friends goodnight when the skinheads pulled up and challenged them. One of the skinheads began a verbal harangue.
Well, first he yelled out the window for them to move their car, and then a couple seconds later he asked them 2 or 3 times to move their car.
As Sarah retreated to his apartment and his friends attempted to drive away, the skinheads got out of their car. One of them, baseball bat in hand, smashed the windows out of the car Sarah's friends were driving. He then turned on Sarah.
I saw the bat come back twice.
Like he was chopping wood?
Yes.
Mulligata Sarah died in the street, his skull split open. The skinheads initially tried to cover up their involvement in the murder. When arrested, they claimed they killed Sarah in self-defense in a street fight. Witnesses, however, came forward with a different story. And Ken Mischke, a heavy metal musician, pled guilty to murder and was given a prison sentence of 30 years to life. Steve Strasser, a high school dropout, pled guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 9 to 20 years. Kyle Brewster, a former homecoming king, pled guilty to manslaughter. He got from 10 to 20 years. All 3 were members of East Side White Pride, a Portland skinhead gang. Skinheads are conspicuous in their appearance. They are militant, alienated kids who form local street gangs. They are known for fomenting violence. Although not all of them are racist and belligerent, most of them are. And they've been linked to more and more violent acts against blacks, Jews, and other minorities.
Klan is on the march again.
A former Ku Klux Klansman who felt that group had lost its punch, Tom Metzger, with the help of his son John, has emerged as a leader of the skinheads. His group is called WAR, White Aryan Resistance. He's called skinheads his frontline soldiers in a campaign of white supremacy.
We don't promote ourselves as white supremacists. The media call us white supremacists. Nature will decide whether the white race is supreme.
Police believe their teenage suspect was recruited by racist groups in Southern California.
Law enforcement officials have linked skinheads with connections to Metzger to racial violence across the country. They cite a murder in Reno by a Metzger follower, another in San Jose, California, the defacing of synagogues in the San Francisco area. And now 3 skinheads were in chains and heading to prison for the Portland murder. Was justice served? Civil rights attorney Morris Dees didn't think so. He saw the hand of Tom Metzger and WAR at work. Dees' strategy? File a lawsuit against Metzger in civil court seeking monetary damages. A civil case is easier to make and would serve 2 goals.
I felt that this is an opportunity to not only gain money for Sarah, but to put Metzger, who is the most violent, the most dangerous white supremacist group operating in America today, out of business.
The strategy was that if Metzger could be held accountable in a civil court for the killing and forced to pay punitive damages for Sarah's death, these could bankrupt Metzger and the white Aryan resistance and render them powerless.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
It would be a difficult case since Dees had to tie Metzger directly into a Portland murder, which happened 1,500 miles away from Metzger's home base in Southern California. This man, Dave Mazzella, a member of Metzger's inner circle, would be the key. On the witness stand, Mazzella would explain Metzger's connection to the murder and provide the details of the inner workings of the secretive White Aryan resistance.
In public, we say things, and that are a bunch of half-truths and lies, you know, leading people to believe that we're nonviolent. And in private, you know, we talk about beating people up and hurting people and how to get away with things and stuff like that.
Mazzella revealed in court he was just one of many lieutenants traveling the country to build membership in war and carry out Metzger's extremist beliefs. War's lieutenants were hard at work with skinheads in Oklahoma, Tampa, and Dallas, just to name a few. Mazzella testified that the pinnacle of honor in Metzger's organization was recognition in this column in Metzger's newspaper. Prisoners of war, he calls it. Heroes include James Earl Ray, the killer of Martin Luther King. The only route to this place of honor was through prison, by way of violence. Mazzella himself compiled a criminal record of assault and violence after joining war and becoming one of Metzger's closest associates.
Why do you hate blacks?
The war founder presided over Mazzella's cult-like wedding and used Mazzella as a public relations frontman for youth recruiting. Their union began when Mazzella was drawn into war as a 16-year-old.
Dave Mazzella was underage when you were dealing with him, when you were traveling with him, and when you were working with him. Why didn't you leave him alone when his parents said, leave my son alone, when his mother made that specific statement to you?
She never did.
She says that she told you face-to-face, directly, leave him alone, stop it.
No, that never happened.
I told Tom to stay away from my son, not to call my home again, and that David wasn't 18 yet, and he had no right to be telling my son the things that he was telling him and asking him to do the things he did.
Do you feel he was brainwashed by Metzger?
Yes, I do. And I think not just my son, but lots and lots of other teenagers.
It was a whole different world once I entered Metzger's world. It was like, I'd walk down the street, you know, and I'd look at things, I'd see blacks, and they all looked like monkeys, and I'd look at Asians, and they looked, disgusting. It was just like, everything was just, nothing looked real. They looked like, bugs you can step on, people, it didn't matter in this world.
The Metzgers supplied local gangs with published materials which reinforced those images, openly advocating hate among races and praising violence as the solution to racial mixing. War's propaganda featured derogatory cartoons degrading minorities and depicting them as subhuman.
You don't think, honestly, that you're sending out these provocative messages with provocative cartoons to impressionable minds that hit a void and don't cause any reaction, do you?
I expect white youth to stand up for their race and not back down.
Become a skinhead, quit.
Dees introduced as evidence a home video of Metzger motivating his men.
Maybe kick some ass once in a while?
Yeah.
You ever have to do that?
Oh, on occasion. We get to a wreck every now and then, I guess.
How about over here?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, every day, probably. Huh? It's really good to be here with the boys from Tulsa.
The Tom Metzger you see here is not so passive.
And, let's have a little white power here.
White power.
White power.
I have never done something that would knowingly put me in jeopardy of going to jail or prison. I know where the line is, and I've operated on the right side of that line. I go right up to the line, and I may spit over the line, but I know where the line is, and that's the reason I do that is to show the way for other people, because if I don't give these other people some backbone, they won't do anything.
So you're not going to take a baseball bat yourself and hit someone in the head. You'll try to get someone else to do it.
I would not tell someone, and never have told anyone, to go out with a baseball bat and beat people over the head. On the other hand, I have said if you're attacked and it's your legal right to defend yourself, I don't care if you have to pick up a refrigerator and hit somebody, do it.
This is what Tom and John Metzger teach. They teach something called, self-defense. I always say you claim self-defense. So they get out on the street and they provoke a violent incident.
Mazzella testified that Metzger taught him how to provoke fights and then collect publicity out of the skirmish.
I'd send in articles of what happened, which were like report cards. Things that happened in San Jose where a black lady was attacked by some people I recruited. And I'd send those into them, and then as things like that happened, my position in the organization was moving up.
Now, David, while you were in Portland, did you teach and direct East Side White Pride members to commit violent acts against blacks and other minorities in the Portland area?
Yes, I did several times, as a matter of fact.
The crucial link between Mazzella in Portland and Metzger in California was documented by this letter from War Headquarters, introducing Mazzella to the leadership of East Side White Pride. A former member of the group, we'll call Joe, asked us to conceal his identity.
It was more of a social club. It had its violence here and there, and but I don't believe that was a prominent thing to keep it going. I think beer was.
They were unorganized. They didn't have no direction. They didn't know what they were doing.
But Mazzella would change the nature of East Side White Pride. The group hit the streets to promote Mazzella's extremist beliefs. And that's what Mazzella and East Side White Pride were doing in downtown Portland early on the night of the murder, handing out these flyers, printed and provided by Tom Metzger. And afterward, at a meeting on 31st and Pine, Mazzella, along with the Skinheads, made this drawing of a black man with a bullet through his head. As the Skinheads worked themselves up for a later encounter, Mulligatawny Sirrah was returning to his home nearby. Sirrah had come to Portland several years before. His first job was at this elementary school, where he worked as a janitor and was adored by the kids. He worked hard to put himself through school and support his impoverished family back in Ethiopia.
And so the people of the school got together things that he could use, and he slept in the boiler room so that he could save the money and return the money to his father in Ethiopia.
Sirrah was working part-time at Avis, where he had just been selected Employee of the Month. Then he had the grave misfortune to run into the Skinheads of East Side White Pride.
Sirrah was a little man. He weighed about 130 pounds. He was 5 feet 7 inches. Brewster and Miski are big, tough people. And this man was standing on the street simply begging, please.
Mazzella had gone home minutes before the Skinheads spotted Sirrah, but Ken Miski would tell him about it the next day.
And then he's all, well, just a nigger, it's dead, that's all it is.
As Sirrah's family and friends mourned his loss, Tom Metzger put on his phone lines nationwide this message.
Dateline, Portland, Oregon. Now that the initial BS is waning in the Skinhead-Ethiopian confrontation, we may find that these beautiful people were high on crack, and many of these beautiful Negroes had low arrest records. Sounds like the Skinheads did a civic duty.
For punitive damages, $10 million.
The Portland jury ruled overwhelmingly against Metzger, his son, and their associates, naming them responsible for encouraging and assisting in violence in the death of Mulligatawny Sirrah to the tune of $12.5 million in damages. Money to be paid to Sirrah's heir, his 9-year-old son, Hanuk. Sirrah's father from Ethiopia was in Portland for the verdict.
No punishment is fair. No amount of money would be fair at all, because I lost my son. The thing that made me the happiest is that my son's death wasn't in vain, and justice avenged my son's death. That's the most important thing for me.
Disillusioned, Joe left East Side White Pride.
My idea of the group wasn't to go out and kill people. After that happened, it set me into thinking of a lot of things, What are we saying? What are we doing? And the more I thought, the more ludicrous I thought it was, How could we put ourselves above anyone? Skinheads who are following this stuff and not thinking about it for themselves are being used.
Metzger has appealed the verdict. It'll be up to the court to collect the $12.5 million.
My experience has been that these individuals, once we sue them and once we get the judgment, that they go out of business. There's not any way that he'll be able to operate when we take his house and all the money that comes in the mail and his printing presses and anything else that he has to pay off this judgment. This judgment's good for 20 years.
20 years is a long time, Tom. Is it going to take that long to clear it up?
No, Hugh, in a similar case in Alabama, a lawsuit brought against the Klan resulted in a major unit of the Klan being bankrupt just within a matter of months. So this can be very devastating financially for these organizations.
Now, this is a civil case here. What about bringing any criminal charges?
Thus far, the local people in Portland have not brought any criminal cases, charges, but the Justice Department in Washington is investigating the possibility of some type of civil rights violations by Metzger against Sarah in this case. That's under review.
Right. Now, if someone orders a death, he's as guilty of the crime. He claims he didn't order it, but if it's a result of his propaganda, can they still get him, do you think?
Well, they certainly did in the civil case, but again, civil cases are easier to prove than criminal ones in court.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, next, breaking one of our culture's last taboos, people openly discussing their problems with bladder control. Embarrassed silence means...
News wouldn't touch the subject. TV talk shows said no thanks. In fact, this may be the first time a network program has tackled the problem of bladder control. It seems to be one of society's last taboos. And no wonder, if a child is shamed by wetting its pants, what's a grown-up going to feel? Well, the sense of embarrassment is so deep that victims often won't talk about it at all, even to those they love. But tonight, they do. As Dr. Timothy Johnson tells us, the real tragedy is that most sufferers don't know their problem can be helped and even cured.
Sheila Fox says exercise has changed her life, but she's not talking about this kind of exercise. For the last year, the 68-year-old Pittsburgh native has been part of a study here at the University of Pittsburgh to learn special pelvic exercises, as well as biofeedback to control the muscles supporting her bladder.
Like patting my tummy and rubbing my head.
Exactly.
Okay.
Before she came here, Sheila suffered for 10 years with a problem shared by 10 million Americans.
I didn't even go to church because I didn't feel I could do it. I wouldn't spend a weekend at somebody's house unless I knew I was going to have the my own bathroom.
Sheila's problem is known as urinary incontinence, meaning the involuntary leakage of urine. It occurs when the bladder and the urethra, the tube carrying urine from the bladder, don't work, and urine leaks, sometimes profusely, sometimes during activity, sometimes just while sitting. Actually, urinary incontinence is a symptom which can have many different underlying causes. The most common kinds of incontinence are stress incontinence, brought on by such activities as coughing, sneezing, bending over, even laughing, and urge incontinence, which is characterized by the need for frequent urination. Few of Sheila's friends knew she had incontinence, and for a long time, not even her husband knew. In fact, for most victims, urinary incontinence is a secret, a private misery.
When I went to the urologist, he said, "Now, my dear, is it just a little trinkle, or does it run down in your shoes?" And I had to admit that at times it runs down in my shoes. If you don't think that wasn't the most humiliating thing that could ever happen to anyone, that was awful, awful.
Sheila is a classic case. The problem affects more older people than younger, and more women than men. But it's a myth that it only affects older people.
I think of incontinence. I think of someone in a nursing home with Alzheimer's disease who doesn't have the sense to get out of the chair. And here I was. No wonder I wasn't admitting it to anyone.
In fact, incontinence is one of those subjects that almost nobody wants to talk about. Not sufferers, not even the media. Only a few books have been written on the subject in recent years, and the authors had a hard time getting bookstores to carry them. They were rejected by popular talk shows, even turned down by the magazine of the American Association of Retired Persons. But in a column last fall, Ann Landers broke the silence by publishing this letter about one of the books titled Staying Dry. The publicity pushed the book into its 5th printing at Johns Hopkins Press.
You know, if we lose a breast to cancer or any other of our functions, our eyesight, our hearing, that's sad. It's a loss. But sad is a whole lot different than ashamed, embarrassed, stigmatized, and unwilling to say to your partner, who should be your doctor in this case when you've got a medical problem, "Doctor, I need your help. I'm kind of upset about this and it's hard for me to speak about." But because we don't feel sad, but we feel stigmatized, we can't even get that far.
This new openness helped 33-year-old Yolanda Bullis, whose urinary incontinence began 5 years ago.
People talk about cramps and having kids and breastfeeding, but never incontinence, ever.
Yolanda is one of a large group of young women who develop incontinence after childbirth when pelvic muscles are stretched and weakened. Unfortunately, she got an all-too-common response from her physician.
This doctor comes in, this urologist, and says, "Well, you're young, you've had 3 kids, and that's the price you pay for having children sometimes."
Yolanda's doctor recommended surgery to strengthen the urethra. Yolanda had the surgery, but less than 3 months later, the incontinence began again. Now she was using up to 40 pads a day.
Say I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and had 1 cup of coffee. By 8 o'clock, I probably had urinated 10 to 15 times. I felt like everywhere I was, people were staring at me. But it wasn't until I sought out from a psychologist and he told me all the feelings that I were feeling were normal. And that not many people talked about what was wrong with me, and that there were millions of people just like me.
But doctors say that most of this suffering is unnecessary because in 9 out of 10 cases, urinary incontinence can be cured or at least reduced.
Take a deep breath in for me, hold your breath, and push down hard like you're...
Dr. Peter Sand is an expert in urinary incontinence.
Good, and cough for me a couple times. It is not normal to be incontinent of urine. It may be common, but it is not normal, and it can be treated. And it can be treated a lot easier than I think most patients realize.
Okay. Experts also have learned that women are at special risk for incontinence.
We believe that more women suffer from urinary incontinence than men, and the ratio is about 10 to 1, basically because of anatomic differences between women and men. And that's important and not well appreciated sometimes, even by physicians taking care of incontinence.
Some researchers in the field are seeking to improve the way women are treated. At the University of Michigan, Dr. Ed McGuire, a urologist, and Dr. John Delancey, a gynecologist, had a joint clinic to treat patients suffering urinary incontinence. Generally, most patients are treated by one specialist or the other, but here, patients benefit from the combined expertise of 2 disciplines. Part of the ongoing research here at the University of Michigan involves the use of computer imaging. The 3-dimensional views have helped researchers understand the bladder and urethra, but also the other muscles and ligaments in the area around them.
I got to pull these up in the front before I know how much cystocele I got. I'll bet there's not a lot.
Working together, Drs. McGuire and Delancey have come to better understand the complex interrelationships of the urinary system.
We've realized that there is more to the anatomy than perhaps we had understood before. And being able to look at the patient's problems and to see the local areas where patients experience difficulties, and then being able to look at the anatomy to see what is it in that area that has ceased functioning normally, I think is beginning to give us a better idea about why these abnormalities happen.
Men can also have unique problems.
Okay, Judge, just very slowly push down, hard as you can.
Judge Dale Riker first got his problem 2 years ago after the surgical removal of his prostate gland.
And they had told me that incontinence was a possibility. I could go for probably about an hour and a half without changing pads. And if you were beyond that thing, then there was a possibility of soiled clothing and what have you as a result of it.
Judge Riker was able to benefit from an experimental procedure known as collagen injections.
One injects it through a needle underneath the lining of the urethra, almost to create a washer-like effect, a seal. And it's amazingly effective without an operation.
Judge Riker has had several collagen injections. He says he has reduced his incontinence about 50%.
And at this stage, I'm down, if the you'll pardon the expression to a trickle. And I can live with what the present situation is.
Collagen injections are one of the newest forms of treatment for urinary incontinence, but doctors can use a wide array of other treatments, such as exercises to strengthen pelvic muscles to give more support to the bladder and urethra, or biofeedback to help train those muscles, or drugs to cut down on involuntary bladder contractions. However, surgery may still be necessary for the most difficult cases, and most operations involve attaching the bladder neck or urethra to the abdominal wall for added support.
Namely, you can't control what...
But experts are concerned that the message that many new treatments are available is not getting to victims of incontinence. They blame ignorance on the part of some doctors, secrecy on the part of victims, and aggressive marketing by the manufacturers of adult continence products.